What's up, people? I'm super pumped coming off this convo with the great TMBS debunk segment and Jacobin columnist Ben Burgis. A big shout out to Matt McManus for coordinating and making this one happen. I couldn't have asked for a better week either to have this conversation following Ben's lampooning of the so-called post-liberal and new compact magazine launched by Sohrab Ahmari over at Jacobin. Make sure to check out the show notes if you missed his article in my Roundup newsletter this past Sunday. That said, I was very touched and moved by Big Ben's story and struggles in high school, barely making it into college before hitting his stride, and falling in love with creative writing and philosophy, eventually leading him to complete his PhD, becoming an author with 0 books, and eventually meeting Michael Brooks. I couldn't wait to press him a bit too about his new book on Christopher Hitchens either, and the new atheist movement, being that my formal education is in religious studies. In any event, I hope you all enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Rock and roll. Well, listen, Ben, I really appreciate you coming on. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I mean, I'm coming off, I guess, some interesting conversations. I had a conversation with Jeremy Johnson and with Matt McManus. 2, I guess, friends or kind of, well, I mean, almost people within your circle of the internet and type of work that you guys were doing in the past and stuff like that. So, and I mean, they've been just kind of getting me to reflect, I guess, on some of the history that we were all living through, obviously, and listening to a few of your most recent podcasts. You know, I'm thinking about Robert Wright, and obviously your conversation with not only Robert Wright but Doug Lane, where you guys are kind of reflecting back, I guess, you know, of your college days all the way up to the present, and kind of reliving through some of your histories and your growing up in interesting times throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So I guess as a first question, because I mean, listening to all this, I was just trying to figure out, you know, kind of like what ballpark age category do you fall into? Because I know Greenwald and Lane, you know, kind of, they were kind of dropping their age and stuff like that, but I haven't heard, you know, kind of your ballpark.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say I'm 41. I'm turning 42 in April. So yeah, I have, Doug. Doug is definitely Gen X, as would be my guess about Greenwald. I'm actually less sure about him, but but I'm what I'm what, like, USA Today articles and stuff call a zennial, or sometimes a geriatric millennial. I've seen that too. So, gotcha. But I was born in 1980, so that's like right at the very, very oldest thing that could be called a millennial, or, like I said, often like zennial, or God, what's the other stupid fucking phrase? Oregon Trail generation. I see that too.
Cool. I guess I mean I'm born in 77, so I'm actually a bit older than you. But I mean I'm obviously a young Gen X, so I've always kind of been caught in that world. So kind of watching and hearing everything that's been going on. I mean, it's been interesting for me to go out and relive some of the stuff that you guys were talking about online, obviously. So, but if I understand correctly, I mean, you did your BA and you have an MA and an MFA. So, I mean, you've been in and out of school for quite a while. I mean,
yeah, I got, well, I'll just I guess to just really quickly encapsulate all of it, I'll just say I was like, I barely graduated from high school. I was definitely in the enjoying the skipping class and getting high parts of life, and not really spending that much time in school. So I started off at my local community college, and then I transferred to a small college in Grand Rapids, which is near where I'm from, and then obviously college I actually enjoyed, unlike high school, and yeah, I ended up getting a MA in philosophy at Western Michigan, and then in my late 20s, I moved to Florida and got my PhD at the University of Miami. And at that point, I was trying to write fiction also. So I have a MFA in creative writing, but it was like a low residency MFA. So I was getting it during the last couple of years of the PhD, kind of at the same time from the University of Southern Maine.
Gotcha. Yeah, and if I understand correctly, I guess that's kind of the connection that you have with Doug, essentially, right? I mean, because since you guys have obviously within the industry, but if I understand, Doug has ventured into some type of science fiction and creative writing type stuff, and he's ventured into all kinds of different forms of publishing.
Yeah. So right. Yeah. Doug is not what he's primarily known for now, but it's what he probably spent the most time doing. Doug is also a science fiction novelist, and he had a new one not that many years ago, and I don't think he's done. I mean, I imagine there'll be more in the future. And he also, long time ago, back in 2008, I believe. I mean, he started a long time before this, but back then he was the editor of Diet Soap, which was a zine. Like, it was actually started back when that was like, like a I don't know, it was probably like the late 90s, maybe even early 2000s when he started it. So it's like an actual like photocopied zine, I think. But by the time I crossed his path, it was online, and he published a short story that I wrote there in 2008. So that's where I originally knew him from.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that's your connection to Zero Books, and essentially where you kind of start to establish yourself a bit of obviously a writing career, but I mean,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah. I mean, in a sense. So I had yeah, that was back in 2008, and so I knew Doug slightly from that point onward, which is to say that he's somebody who I'd like interact with on Facebook sometimes, and then the actual connection to Zero Books. Well, he also had me on, like, I'm trying to remember. It was a couple times in, like, over the years, like when he had the podcast that was also called Diet Soap back then. Like, he had me on like a couple times, but I did, talk about kind of academic stuff that I was doing. But the Zero Books connection comes in 2018. So yeah, a good 10 years after I first met Doug. And at that point, I was spending a lot of time talking and thinking about your one of your country's more unfortunate exports, Jordan Peterson, who had was this is like 2018. So this is like kind of the height of the Peterson craze, and I knew people who were people I knew from extended family, or from like people who back when I lived in Korea, I used to like hang out at expat bars with or whatnot, who were into Peterson. And so just as a, private citizen, I was spending a lot of time like arguing on social media about this guy. And since Doug put together this thing that was a sort of quasi academic conference in Boise, Idaho, he collaborated with a local group there to put it together, because Peterson was originally slated to be on Doug's the Zero Books podcast, and then he backed out of it, or whatever. Somebody who worked for him backed out of it on his behalf, maybe, presumably because they finally got around to Googling him and figured out it'd be a hostile interview. And and then shortly afterwards, Peterson was on the Joe Rogan Experience and and Joe asked him in his, characteristic sort of genially stoned way, it's like, so what? Why don't you ever debate any of these equality of outcome Marxists are always talking about? And, Peterson, I won't try to do a Peterson impression, but, said, well, they don't want to, they don't want to talk to me. And because he just backed out of Doug's podcast, Doug got pissed off about that. This is what sort of led him to collaborate with this group in Idaho to do this conference. It was called Jordan Peterson, a conference in lieu of a debate. And, because I had not really been doing like political commentary kinds of stuff almost at all. Like I had dipped my toe into that just a tiny bit before this. I'd done a couple of articles, like probably 3 or 4 in total for Counterpunch in the couple of years leading up to this. And then the other way I'd sort of dipped my toe in was I went to I presented a paper at an academic conference in Cuba back in 2013, right? So like, sort of in there was like a political thing. And so sort of in the same spirit, right? I was like, oh, I'll submit like an abstract to this conference. That sounded fun. And, and I told Doug I was going to do it in like sort of Facebook chat. And he was like, oh, cool. Look out for that. Also, I was wondering if you wanted to write a book for us. And that was like when he sort of laid the idea on me for the first book that I wrote, which is called Give Them an Argument.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, no, because I mean, obviously, I knew. Well, I mean, obviously, you've got quite much more of an academic sort of bent to you, kind of like McManus. And I mean, that's what I mean. Eventually, I mean, McManus is the one eventually that got me onto Michael's work.
Okay, that's
I mean, and the same thing. I mean, I was not on social media at all prior to the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon. And essentially I came to, or somebody said that, like I should start following Peterson. And it's a good buddy of mine actually from South Africa, I've known for quite some time. And he works specifically in the addiction and recovery space and stuff like that. And he was doing research and he said that, listen, you need to go and pick up on this guy. And he's got a background actually in addiction treatment and recovery, specifically because he did his PhD on alcoholism. So I got onto it, and obviously, he skyrocketed around that time, but I was just like, so in shock, like, I'm Canadian, like, why am I learning about this guy from my buddy of mine in South Africa, and what's the whole big deal about? And kind of like you, I mean, I was just like shell shocked about, what the hell he was advocating and the positions that he was taking. And I was just like completely off my rocker once I started to hear a lot of it. But my formal, I guess, academic training and background is actually in religious studies.
Okay.
So once I got onto your work and I discovered Michael's work, and then I discovered that Michael had we shared very similar sort of growing up experiences. Kind of growing in a family that's kind of very much steeped in the counterculture sort of 1960s movement that adopted a sort of radical sort of form of education. My dad was essentially, I wasn't homeschooled the way Michael was, but very much along that sort of radical alternative mode of thinking around the household and exposing me to different ways of thinking in education and stuff like that. So growing up,
it's funny because I didn't actually, during the years when I, knew Michael well and was working with him, I didn't, he never really talked that much to me, at least about his family background and all of that, so it's kind of funny. Like most of that stuff I've discovered, since he passed, that like I had, I remember actually not long after he died, watching this video of this lecture he gave at Lafayette College. And in there, he's described his background. He has this kind of funny line where he's talking about, various jobs that he did and things he tried his hand out at various points. And he says, he has this line like, well, that I was like a meditation teacher for a minute to make my parents happy. It's like, okay, now I'm getting a picture. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, I guess my track is much more along Jeremy Johnson's line, because Jeremy Johnson, in terms of his stuff around Gene Gebser and the whole consciousness movement and countercultural, and obviously stuff around Ken Wilber and integral theory. So once I started to see Michael drop some of that, and obviously seeing that, he was part of the diaspora that moved away from that, obviously after he got into college and, start to get his own formal education, do his own thinking and stuff like that. I was hooked. I was just like, wow, that's fascinating because I mean, Wilbur has had a pretty deep impact on me intellectually and formally growing up. But obviously, getting into university and getting into religious studies, I mean, I was slammed with professors that were much more steeped in critical theory and, I mean, just strong academic background, not loosey goosey, kind of the way he was. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, I mean, once I start to see, like how that informed his ideas of cosmopolitan socialism
Mhm.
and how he was starting to go and advocate for, kind of a new left or a new engaged left, and seeing how that was almost paralleling very closely to what Matt was talking about of a new engaged left. And obviously with some of the thinking that you were doing too, in terms of, that the left needs to go and adopt a more sort of uh, strong, not critical stance, but, be logically consistent. And obviously, if we're going to go out and advocate, let's go out and advocate it, in a very strong and logical sort of position. And I mean, I was just amazed to see how you guys were moving or advocating for a new left, right? Something that, one that could eventually go and take power, but also, you guys are not talking, standard Marxist or socialist
Mhm.
or even, progressive or left leaning sort of thought necessarily. I mean, although that you guys are, you're really strongly grounded in your own form of traditions and the way you guys are framing things. But I was just so amazed by all of that. So now I guess, I mean, obviously I'm just as shocked as you in terms of Michael's passing away. But now that I'm seeing sort of the history behind all of this, right? I mean, listening to you and Doug and obviously Robert Wright, and obviously talking about the new
Mhm.
atheist movement, and some of
Yeah.
the formative historical things that impacted you during the 80s, 90s, and all the way up to the early 2000s and stuff like that. I'm just so amazed, um, in terms of, I guess maybe where we are today, but also I haven't reflected that much back on it either.
Mm.
But I guess in terms of your leftist sort of roots, I mean, you were saying that you got, I guess, during your university days, you were very much in the sort of anti-war movement type stuff.
Mhm.
So it wasn't that you weren't political or involved in some type of level. You were.
Yeah, no, I was yeah, I had yeah, I mean the college stuff I think is probably as good an entry point as that for anything. So I was definitely it was not the first time, that I'd had any of these sorts of views, but I've been certainly a formative experience for me was the aftermath of 9/11, which happened which happened like early in the fall semester of my junior year of college, and um, seeing like the kind of hysterical nationalist militarist kind of response to that, which I have to say is something I've been feeling a little bit of deja vu about since Russia invaded Ukraine, and
Yeah, no
and
shit.
seeing
Yeah.
seen some of the reactions to that, but I had that was like really that was really striking for me. I mean, and it's kind of funny, like maybe in this sort of parallel way. Yeah, I just wrote this book about Christopher Hitchens, but like it's sort of the opposite way. It was really striking for him, right? That because I had that same sort of sense of clarity, but like in the other direction, for like opposing, the wars, for opposing the assaults on civil liberties, like all of that stuff. Um, and and yeah, so I was very involved in organizing anti-war protests in Michigan in 2002 and 2003, and in a yeah in a variety of ways at that time, uh, and I in sort of pursuit of that, I was involved a little bit in the Green Party when that seemed like that might become something in that the 2002, 2004, elections. And then later on, by like 2006, which is when I moved to Florida for my PhD, I was pretty burned out on it all. Like I hadn't changed my mind about anything, right? But I wasn't, but I also, I guess, was pretty demoralized about the effects of activism or lack of effects, and I didn't see that going much of anywhere anytime soon, and I just kind of drifted out of it as people do, as probably most people do, who pass through those movements. So really the whole, and I was
well, knee deep in philosophy as well. I mean, it's not like
yeah,
crisscrossing activism with deep philosophy and the type of studies that you were doing. Well, I mean, not that it's impossible to go out and make those crisscrosses, but I mean, obviously, it's
sure,
never.
people certainly do, but yeah, I
Yeah,
have but that's not, and I guess it's also just one thing reflected back on that, I would say, is I think it's just a very different era. I mean, maybe that's kind of like um vacuous, but I mean, it was, right? I mean, that they have, so like looking back, at my, the years that I was getting the PhD and then right afterward, like people who I knew in graduate school and around it were either fairly apolitical or pretty mainstream American liberals, right?
yeah,
Those are pretty much the options. Like you run into the occasional oddball libertarian or whatever, but like pretty much, right? Those two, and
which is
so
pretty much, I guess, your conversation too with Greenwald, because your conversation with Greenwald was pretty interesting along those lines too, where I mean, you were both kind of reflecting back and saying that there was, big progress, I guess, on the liberal sort of left front, progressive front.
mhm.
But, true progress, I guess, from a leftist perspective, it never really kind of took hold. I mean, maybe in the cultural left, there's been elements of wins there, but I mean, real change, I guess, from a socioeconomic level, never really
Yeah,
kind of set in or any way, shape, or form. So yeah, I could see how you
no,
could.
definitely not, right? I mean, this is a time, like, I mean, especially, I mean, I think that the 2000s, which is really what we're talking about right now, are like really dismal along those lines, like really dismal. Like even the sorts of things that you'd really think of in terms of social progress, um, even that wasn't really happening much, in at that time, right? I mean, like I think we forget exactly how defeated people felt for a lot of that era, right? I mean, like even like 2004. I mean, just to pick the most obvious sort of social equality issue that has galloped forward since then, right? I mean, that the like 2004, George W. Bush was reelected to a great extent by running against gay marriage. That he had
Yeah,
like that was a wedge issue for him. That like to oppose it. That they like get out the vote by sure like having oftentimes like redundantly triple banning it in places where it was already like banned in two different laws, in different states,
yeah,
to get out the vote in swing states. And
and even
and,
Obama. I
and
mean, Obama was wishy washy on that too. I mean, in
oh
terms
yeah,
of yeah,
totally
yeah,
right. Yeah, he was well, Obama was actually, I mean, I don't believe this, and neither does anybody else, right? And but he said, when he was running for president in 2008, that he was against it,
yeah, sure, yeah,
and like he just flat out said he was against it for religious reasons, which is like also what the way that Hillary Clinton talked back then. I mean, that was a standard. That was a standard thing, for like mainstream Democrats to say even in 2008, and certainly the idea, in terms of I don't want to understate the importance of that kind of civil and legal equality, which I obviously think is foundational for any kind of worthwhile egalitarian politics. But certainly in terms of anything that would have gone deeper in terms of opposing entrenched interests, just absolutely not, right? I mean, this is that like the the only time you heard the word socialist was when Republicans were accusing just bathwater liberal centrists of it. Like the idea, I remember like old science fiction movies where it would be like a plot detail that somebody was getting back from surfing in Afghanistan in like 2030, and it'd be like, yeah, that makes sense, right? That they that sounds unfortunately very realistic. So that was the era, right? And so certainly in terms of academia, like or at least my kind of academia, that I think a more sort of continental-ish, program, you mentioned critical theory earlier, probably would have been different, to a certain extent. But like, certainly like, mainstream like analytic philosophy, there were two guys, who I knew, in my program who shared anything like, my politics, that they,
wow. Okay. Yeah.
Like there was, and like one of those was a transplant, it was this like Turkish communist, who was, studying the US. So,
yeah. And I mean, I've taken 2 credits in my philosophy department while I was completing my degree in religious studies, and it was an analytic sort of department, and there was no way in hell I would have, majored in philosophy if that was the major standard type stuff that they were doing. So, I mean, that's why, I mean, for me, religious studies was very interdisciplinary and broad, and, history of ideas. And so that's why I gravitated much more towards that. But I mean, I was also coming to it very much kind of along, I guess, Michael's sort of bent and interest in culture and broad ideas of philosophy and cosmopolitan sort of thinking type stuff. So that's why.
Yeah, I mean, so I think again, I think a lot of this has changed now, just because the world's changed. Like I have, I mean, in some ways, I mean, it's very small and it doesn't mean much in terms of the broader world, of course. But like, in some ways, I actually do still find that kind of remarkable, right? I mean, like all of these people who, like, people who were like, in 2008, were either didn't care very much or like were enthusiastic about Barack Obama, right? Who I knew in graduate school, who are like, so, or people who I would even like sometimes like get into an argument with at the bar, about drones, or I would say I was a socialist, and that was like an oddity, at that at that time and place, right?
Sure,
that they,
no doubt.
get a lot of very very skeptical, questions about that. And it's like half of these guys now are like, DSA members, or like, what if they, or like, people who are like, like they'll listen to like Chapo Trap House every week, and it's like I don't, something very strange has happened there, right?
But yeah, no doubt, yeah.
But that was, so I was very, as I mentioned, I was writing fiction, and and I was doing my academic work, grad school and after, and that was all the stuff that I was focused on, and just kind of life at that time, and it really wasn't until like there were some stirrings, definitely, like post grad school, even when I was like on the other side of the world. I was living for a couple of years in South Korea. Like I had I when Occupy, and then Black Lives Matter, all that sort of happened. Like there were definitely some stirrings there, but I didn't really sort of read.
So you were in Asia for Occupy, during the Occupy whole push. You were
trying to think. Not necessarily during the whole thing. Definitely it was part of it. Because I'm trying to think about the timeline in my head, like because I might have been back in the U.S. for some of that time, but I have but like definitely around then, like I was in Asia, from well, the first round was the 2010-2011 school year, and then I was back from
Interesting.
from 2013 to 2015. I was back living in Asia again 2013 to 2015. So like I have a yeah. If you hear at some point, while we're talking, if you hear any barking or meowing in the background, our two pets were
No
so
stress. Yeah, yeah.
we're adopted when we were living there. So we always call them the Koreans. It's like, oh, we're gonna leave this weekend. Who's gonna take care of the Koreans? That's since uh, but yeah, like while a lot of this was going on, I was out of the country, and I didn't, and it was after I got back the second time, right? Got back to the U.S. for good in 2015. Shortly after that, when the first Bernie campaign got going, is when I
Start to get
actually
involved
really,
and
re-engaged politically for the first time.
oh,
Like
cool. Yeah, because I
really,
mean, Jeremy and I were trying to go out and reconstruct because I mean, Jeremy befriended Michael back in the day before Occupy online through Facebook, and they were in mutual sort of circles around some stuff around integral theory and Ken Wilber's type stuff before the 2008 financial crash. But they were already going very much for a sort of pro corporate big business, and they had adopted this thing called conscious capitalism and everybody at that point, which created the sort of diaspora, which I'm sure obviously would have had a major impact on Michael at that point. And then the next thing that I came across after that is obviously his interview with Pacman, which is right around Occupy and is of the 2001. So that just helps me go out and put so much context and some of the history in terms of, I guess, some of those markers for a lot
yeah.
of things.
So I didn't meet Michael till yeah. I mean, I've the amount of time that I knew him was, I guess, a fraction of what Jeremy would have, but I have because I didn't, I mean, I didn't meet Michael until not very many years before he died. I mean, it was actually at that conference in Boise in 2018 that I met him. I mean, I'd started to.
Well, because I guess this is your involvement with DSA and Jacobin. I mean, because from online and everything else that I was trying to sift through and trying to figure out and just trying to see, how or when did you start to go and get involved in some of that type of stuff? And I mean, obviously Jacobin was founded in 2010. So obviously that whole rise around, that whole movement is a big push there in terms of what some people have kind of called, I guess, millennial socialism, which I think is kind of degrading in some sort of way.
Yeah, sure. But, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a little degrading, but it's maybe not a terrible.
It's dismissive. I find it to be very dismissive to go and say, "Oh, it's nothing but millennial."
Yeah.
In a certain way.
No,
I think that's not
tied into the which is also funny because it's like millennial is sort of eternally used as a word that means kid, even though like at this point, like God, I mean, by some definitions, I'm a millennial and I'm 41, right?
Yeah, but still, I mean, to me, it's a question because the socialist element was always there. I mean, obviously, it goes all the way back to to people like Dorothy Day and some of the larger historical roots of all the way back to the National Review. Right. I mean, some of the big debates that we're having there where they would actually go out and have socialists on that. Obviously, you and Michael go all the way back and, kind of dig up that history. And there's a huge history that's there to go out and be uncovered. And it was just not always as present. So Jacobin, I think, has done a formidable job to go out and bring that up. I mean,
no, for sure.
He's done an amazing job to go out and see. So, I mean, for me, even as a Canadian looking at that as well, right? Because the Canadian left is very different than the American left. And socialism in the States is not the same thing as, something that would be up in Canada. Although, obviously somebody like Leo Panich would go out and crisscross both, and have a big influence, across the border as well. But I mean, thank you because that explains a lot. And I guess you're uncovering or going back to Hitch now is an amazing timing of it because it does. I mean, he was just so much in the mix of all of this. So even when you framed it, like in terms of his unwillingness to go out and take a very atheistic stance, particularly within the United States because of the religious fundamentalism. I could see why, taking a firm position on something like that is a worthy cause, a very worthy cause on some fronts, because you guys have not. I mean, there's, like you just highlighted. I mean, those wins are very superficial, kind of lip service, not even really, presidents going out and adopting, full on, all the way up to Obama. So
it was like midway through the Obama administration when the winds had shifted enough that that they could that they could even say, like, gay people get married, we're for it, right? It's like it was and that was it was like pretty late in Obama's first term, I think, and just before the Supreme Court decision, which was like itself, I don't think would have happened if public opinion hadn't really shifted quite a bit by then. But yeah,
and even just Sam Harris. I mean, his letter to A Christian Nation is, I mean, as much as I don't like or enjoy Sam Harris, I mean, that book is a particular historical piece that, I mean, as an American growing up in that kind of environment, and seeing the religious right and evangelical religious right as a power move that's been undergoing and, gaining steam during those whole times, I can go out and understand why, somebody like that might actually go out and write that at that particular moment in history too. And I mean, I grew up on Chris Hedges and Terry Eagleton when that sort of new atheist thing kind of came about, because, I mean, that's just how I just kind of landed, various professors and some of their influence. And that's how I gravitated in terms of to go out and unpack the new atheist movement. So I was very much like Michael, kind of being like, like I've never grown up in a very fundamentalist sort of household. I was, very liberal in terms of, ideas around what religion is, and very progressive, and then, and even open to other forms of religion, in a very sort of cosmopolitan based and broad-minded approach, when it came to religion, and even ideas of what the religious left, people like King and Dorothy Day and some other sort of characters. And so Hedges just fit in naturally within that framework. But I guess this is, because you seem to be shifting, listening to your conversation with Robert Wright, and obviously Doug. I mean, you have a very much more sophisticated, nuanced take on religion now.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say this. It's something that I spent a long time, well, actually kind of back in that era we were talking about before, the sort of, re-engaging with politics in, 2015, which is, I guess just to do the timeline, right? I mean, that was like, so I joined DSA in like at the end of 2015, which means that I'm like probably one of the like 2% of DSA members who've been in it for that long, but then and I'd started to, well, I wrote my first book for Doug in 2018, and I had and that kind of led to me meeting Michael through Doug, and I started to there was kind of like a few months when, like, I don't know, a few times a month I'd like take the train in from New Jersey, which is where I was living at that time. My wife and I were both adjuncts in the philosophy department of Rutgers at that time, and I'd take the train in and meet up with Michael for dinner or drinks in Brooklyn, and kind of a lot of that was sort of felt like we'd actually just kind of getting into some of this history, because a few hours ago, actually earlier today, I've been making myself finally get through something as I told Matt McManus I would write like a year ago, which is the introduction to his Cosmopolitan Socialism book.
Oh, okay,
which like, I mean, we really are getting like, it's pretty bad, like how long it's been, but it's like one of these things where I think think among other things, like, even though I wrote like a couple of articles for Jacobin about Michael right after he passed, like kind of no problem. I think that like somehow being a couple of years, down the line, it's like, it's way harder to do it now than it was then, for whatever reason. But anyways,
yeah, no, I totally understand, man. Yeah, no shit. I can imagine.
So I'm finally, kind of forcing myself to do that. So I was kind of reciting some of this in that introduction, but yeah, I feel like, a lot of that was kind of, like most of what we talk about during those was like sort of whatever was going on, politically at that time, and kind of like, uh, arguments that were happening then. And a lot of that was just sort of, I kind of felt like would sort of be my, solidified in my head what I thought about some of the stuff by, bouncing off of him. And this was all before, like I actually started going on the show, which was like early 2019, started doing the debunk segment on TMBS, and working with him on his book, Against the Web. And anyway, but like when I started to go on the show, I mean, that's how I met Bhaskar. I mean, technically I met Bhaskar once before in like 2017 or something. And, I was out, with like a mutual friend, like had some like drinks at his birthday, and like I had and had, try to remember exactly, like, but it's like, I think argued with him a little bit about Lenin and about, why he didn't think OJ did it. But and, the but then like I met him again, and we were both on set, like in person at the same time on the show, and I had and I made a so it was in between the main show and the post game, and I made a joke about how like having beers, and I made a joke about how the love how about Deflategate, which whatever, people don't follow, American football is doesn't mean anything, but it's like a,
well, somewhat. I mean, I actually played football up here in
okay.
CEGEP/high school in terms of, yeah. So no, American football is something. I mean, if you're going to go out and pick a team, I mean, I'll let you know, I'm taking the Steelers all the way. So
okay, all right, fair enough.
No, but sure, yeah, no, I totally get it. Yeah,
but I made this kind of half jokey comment about how Deflategate was like Lava Jato, the sort of politicized corruption scandal in Brazil that Michael was always talking about back then.
okay.
And Bhaskar said, well, that sounds like an article to me, you should write that. And I did, and then I guess he liked it, because then, like, not long after that, he asked if I wanted to like be a regular columnist at Jacobin. So that's
fuck, wow.
That's the timeline for that. But anyway, yeah. So that was like, 2019, the Jacobin part. But yeah, I mean, I guess on religion. So during this sort of period before re-engaging politically, it's something that I did spend a lot of time on, just because as a grad student, and then the jobs I had afterwards, I would teach intro to philosophy every semester, and so that kind of kept me engaged with the subject, because that was always like, there's the sort of like in some ways like the sort of like sexiest thing you could do in an intro to philosophy class, because like it engages with, with like in terms of the sort of overlap between subjects that are natural for that and stuff students care about, right? Is always the arguments about the existence of God stuff. So that was always something that, because of that, I was very engaged with. And this is the peak of the new atheism era in the late 2000s. And I remember, I can remember like watching like Christopher Hitchens from his debate that he did in Grand Rapids, actually at Grand Valley State University, with his brother Peter, who's like, to a hilarious extent, is like the mirror image of all of Christopher's views. He's like
working for first things. Like, I still can't wrap my head around that. Fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so fucked up.
Yeah. It's like so Christopher was like a ex-socialist who still had a mostly left-wing worldview, but like somehow managed to like side with the neocons in the 2000s about foreign policy, and of course was a militant atheist, probably above everything else. And Peter is deeply religious and a paleocon right-wing isolationist. So that's so there you go. But like,
what the hell did happen at Christmas? That's one thing I'd love to.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, so they're having this. So Christopher's at this debate with Peter in Grand Valley, and there's this video, and the video I was used to watch on YouTube was just Christopher's opening statement for that debate, right? So it was just like that in isolation, and I talk about this pretty extensively in the book, but at the time I remember like being really impressed by it, because I thought whatever, it's Christopher Hitchens, he's absurdly eloquent, he has he knows how to make a powerful case, and so and this is so his sort of case somewhat against belief in God, but really for his sort of humanistic moral critique of like sort of standard Judeo-Christian kind of moral views is something I always found really powerful. And there's still elements of that resonate with me now, but
there's just so much bad religion, though. I mean, this is what I got, very much from just listening to what I was listening to you and Michael go back and forth. And I mean, it's just, this Santa Claus type idea, right? I mean, it's present in a lot of pockets of, particularly Protestantism and evangelical sort of sphere, right? I mean, you guys were facing the whole sort of creationist type stuff where let's go out and revamp the high school curriculum. Like, if that's the direction things are going in, well, like, what the fuck? Like, obviously, that's a red flag for anybody. It's not sophisticated high-end theology here. That's something that you get exposed to along, Terry Eagleton or, some other people and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's
no, for sure. Right. So I'll just say that said, even though, I am I'm an atheist. It's something I talk about a little bit in the book, especially in the like author's note at the end, that like I have, this is definitely, almost, I think technically the only thing that Michael and I ever argued about on air was GMOs, but that's because he's a hippie, but
and apparently Doug Lane is borderline, I think, hippie Chris Cry.
Oh yeah, definitely.
He can easily be pushed over the lane.
definitely. But like but it was always like a little bit of a background thing, right? Because that was like like, okay, whatever, there's probably some of the GMO and nuclear stuff. I mean, there's some disagreements there, but like really, as far as like anything more significant than that, right? They have a, like the thing that I was,
the ethics and moral question, I mean, clearly is a big one. I mean, this idea that, that you beautifully write about that in the book in terms of, some divine ethics, like, give me a break. I mean,
Sure,
we don't
sure.
need any form of divine ethics to go out and be good people. You can be a good person
Yeah,
regardless, right? Or even,
yeah.
the Aristotelian sort of virtue ethics type stuff that
Mm-hmm.
you attack as well there. I mean, this is why I enjoy so much reading you and Matt. I mean, you guys are so rigorous when it comes to a lot of your philosophy. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
such a joy to
Can,
see.
can you tell what Matt's religious views are? By the way, I could
he's
never.
definitely a recovering Catholic.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I could never quite tell. Like I always feel like he might have some sort of like I always feel like in some sort of half closeted way, he might still have more religious inclinations, but
Yeah.
um,
Well,
but
his whole involvement with the Christian socialism type stuff. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
and I mean, he brought that up on the pod with me specifically, and I appreciate it because I mean, he's willing to
Yeah.
go out and address the whole muscular Christianity and the rise
Mm-hmm.
of this
Mm-hmm.
crazy, I actually, Catholic right that we're witnessing right now in various circles along Patrick Deneen's sort of stuff, which is it's scary, man.
It is.
It's frightening stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, because I don't. I mean, I'm always curious, right? It's like, so if you gave like Deneen or Vermeulen or any of these people like like a access to like a magical genie who could like just reorder society according to their preferences, without having to worry about what's politically viable. Like, I mean, would we have witchbird inns? Is there like?
Well, I mean,
I genuinely don't know the answer.
Douglas Murray is the only person that I saw panic.
Vague.
Douglas Murray panicked though. He did on stage down at the last National Conservative Conference. Like you can see like his back went up and being like, and Dave Rubin didn't pick up on any of it. Like, but I mean, Douglas Murray is smart enough to realize that, wait a minute, if we keep going down this line of thought here, guys, like, like how long is, Dave Rubin and me going to go out and stay on this stage here with you guys? And it was a very sort of unbelievably tense moment. And I even think Douglas Murray is backed off a lot of some of these talking or associating himself specifically with Patrick Deneen and the National Conservative Movement more generally. So, and that's an interesting thing too, because I mean, postmodern conservatism is not necessarily national forms of conservative or the Christian right that we're witnessing kind of surfacing right now that Matt is playing around with. And, is an interesting kind of question to go out and wrestle with. But that's why I think you bringing up Hitch is just so timely, man. It's just because Hitch just has that charge as a figure to go out and discuss all of these subjects. So, I mean, it's so pertinent, and the read has just been fantastic. And I mean, it's just joggled me to go back through history too, right? That, what was the new atheist movement? What happened with Sam Harris and Chris Hedges? Even that Chris Hedges and Sam Harris debate is a fascinating one too. There's just so much history there.
Yeah. So I was going to say, right. So even though, even though, I am, when you get right down to it, right, a pretty, a pretty old school materialist. I'm pretty, I'm pretty convinced that that nothing happens when you die, right? Which is which is a much more depressing thought now for a variety of reasons, than it ever used to be, after COVID and some.
But I mean, even it's beyond that, though, Ben. I think your position is so much better than that in a certain way, because it's like, who cares? How does this have to go out and mean in terms of your particular behavior in the world?
Well, that's the thing, right? Because I think there are really two questions here. One of them is sort of, what is your best guess about metaphysics, right? That's one question. And then the other question is, how does that relate to how you want to change the world? How does that relate to who's an ally and who's an enemy? How does it relate to all that stuff, right? And on that, right? So it's like on the first question, not entirely. I've got my critique, whatever, but like on the first question, there is a decent amount of stuff I can see in those old like Hitchens debates that I'm, more or less agree with, right? But like I have but on the second question, I mean, I think there's, I was never completely on board with new atheism as far as all that stuff goes for some of these reasons, and that it's especially been crystallized to me in the last several years. I mean, look, I mean, if nothing else, I mean, just to start with the obvious personal bias, I have every time I'm at a um every time I'm in a public debate or something where religious issues come up, I can always honestly say, look, I have I'm an atheist materialist, but I have a huge soft spot for the religious left, for people like, and that I'll usually do this thing where I'll mention Dr. King, I'll mention Cornel West, and then the punchline is that I'll mention my wife Jennifer Burgis, who's a very progressive Christian. And
no way.
yeah,
Okay, I had no idea.
so I think that last one tends to convince people that I mean it, but
Yeah, no, the wife test always is, you can't go wrong with that. Listen, the wife got my back on this.
Exactly. So it's like, so yeah, I don't, and I mean, yeah, we, she had, when we were living in New Jersey, she went to this church there where, I've like, tagged along a few times, where like they had the pastor there was the Green Party candidate for governor of New Jersey at one point. He had they were always like doing things like giving undocumented immigrants refuge in the church and things like that. So yeah, I actually do. I actually do have a massive soft spot for the religious left, I think the thing that ties in, both with what I talk about in the Hitchens book, but also with Michael's work at Cosmopolitan Socialism, is the which I did, like, I mean, it's a little bit funny, right? Because I always like talk about this in the third person. I think at this point, it's not a very well kept secret that I did a fair amount of writing for that book. But I always feel like I always feel comfortable with the third person, because it's like, the way I see it is, it's like, Michael was the director of the movie. Like, I shot some footage. They had it was very much his baby. But in Against the Web, like the way that he lays it out in there, and in many, many, many conversations leading up to Against the Web, that you have, religions are ultimately a certain kind of, cultural expression, that these are these sort of, vast traditions that sure will incorporate practices and texts and all sorts of other things, but like none of these things just are the religion, right? I mean, like certainly from the perspective of I mean, look, I could make sense of it if I were like when people have these weird arguments about like whatever the sort of arguments people would have in sort of the George W. Bush / New Atheism era about whether Islam is fundamentally a religion of peace, or it's fundamentally whatever, evil terrorist religion or whatever. It's like, well, look, if I were a Muslim, I understand what it would mean to say that that like one or another of these strands was real Islam, right? But like since I'm not, I don't know what that means, right? That they have these are just, sure, there are.
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing with Christianity too, right? I mean, it's Christianities. It's not Islam. I mean, there are multiple versions of Islams. I mean, it's just, and Michael talked about that, and it's a great video of you and Michael, by the way, talking about that book. I mean, it's very touching and moving as well to see, just the deep conversations you guys had nurturing each other intellectually all these years is just it's very moving, Ben. I mean, I could
Like,
see, I mean, it's just been, and it's the same thing with Matt. I mean, the conversations I had with Matt and even with Jeremy is
mhm.
just this mutually enriching intellectual friendship that you guys have all had, and it's had a deep impact on the culture beyond. And it's really getting, I mean, for me, I mean, the reason why I've been reaching out is because how rich it is. And I mean, not only to go and me reflect on my own life, but also to the idea of what a next left would look like. And that is, there's so much, is there so much going on right now on the left that something new is emerging possibly, right? And what does that look like? How does it work? How is it going to go and be put into practice is just, to me, exciting. I mean, it's
Yeah,
so freaking exciting to see
yeah,
you guys talk about that. And there is a generational torch passing too that's happening there. Like when I saw you guys interact with like guys like Richard Wolff and
mhm,
Cornell
mhm,
West and some of these, older, torchbearer
mhm,
guys that have been in the trenches, and even somebody like Greenwald, that are passing
mhm.
on their knowledge to very competent and very, I mean, skilled, not just media people, but I mean, intellectuals now coming up. And I mean, it's been so amazing to watch. I mean,
Yeah,
it's exciting. It really, really exciting. And I hope I'm not prying or in any
mhm.
way by,
Go
like
nuts.
by bringing up this stuff. And, uh, I appreciate your time and, on all of this. And I'd love to come back around and
Sure,
keep
yeah,
this conversation going, you know,
yeah, yeah. Very happy
on
to.
so much of these fronts and stuff like that. It's just so rich.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, yeah. So all I was saying, earlier is I just think like, um, you're going to find, um, in that last chapter of Against the Web, which is by far the part of the book that was the most important to him. That's what he, uh, that's what he would constantly emphasize, when talking about it. That, and I think, I think it ties in both the religion question and also some of what you're talking about in terms of, what you're calling the next left, which is that I think that you're going to, I mean, specifically on the religion question, or really the cultural question more broadly, right? That they have that. I think that what Mike really saw is that, is that if you're going to have, a sort of global movement, then what that's going to need to involve people sort of expressing certain kinds of values, certain kinds of truths in the language of whatever they're coming out of, right? That they in Muslim language or Christian language or whatever, right? That they whatever it might be, and but fortunately, right, there is no sort of essential core of any of these things, right? I mean, that they're just people who are, who will find their way to the values that we like, or vice versa, right? And express them in this language, and really, ultimately, I mean, I think what Michael was sort of driven by is a vision of, that word cosmopolitan is very deliberately chosen, right? In fact, in the sort of, process of, finishing up and editing the book, like there's a point where the word was kind of almost lost because, sort of back and forth about whether that, has all the right connotations and, and none of the wrong ones, or whether it's, and it was retained, I think, very deliberately, and I'm glad it was, right? Because I think it gets across something really specific, which is this idea that, ultimately, like what kind of society do we want to live in, and it's one that I think is captured by that kind of metaphor about cities and people, traveling and coming from different places and kind of mixing together and sort of, trading influences in ways that are, not like, everything's kind of available to everybody, and that's, and I think for Michael in particular, I think that's very linked to his idea that we do, maybe this is a little bit too crude a distillation of it, but to like maybe like boil it down to a little bit more of a bumper sticker than he did, right? That if we're going to kind of, fight the kind of political war that we want to fight, right? That we need a little bit of a, detente in the culture war, and to have, and not in the sense that anybody's been thrown under the bus or that that you don't, because you do have a sort of baseline recognition of the importance of civic and legal equality for everybody across groups, but that they have that you do need to calm down a little bit about sort of battling cultural sensibilities.
No
and
shit. Yeah.
and like I just remember he would, not going to name any names, but the way that he would sort of make fun of people who somehow seemed to believe both, who'd have this sort of like ultra left, like kind of fantasy ideas of how like a transition to socialism could happen, that like they're sort of imagining, I don't know, 1789 or 1917, played out again in, the 21st century. But at the same time, they just have the narrowest parameters for like all the boxes you had to check on everything all the time, to be in the club. And it's like, so what are you guys envisioning? There's going to be like barricades in the street, but it's going to be like the 3% of the population that passes all your tests, that's doing it, good luck with that. Right. So I think that, and I think that this even ties in. I hope all of these strands aren't too, like disparate. That like it sort of all makes sense together. But I think it even kind of ties into, why he was so interested in somebody like, Lula da Silva in Brazil, who was not like, who in terms of his record as governing, as president of Brazil, is like a pretty, was a pretty moderate social democrat, like as these things go, right? But I think that what really, beyond the sort of his story and some of the, economic progress he was able to oversee there, and obviously this, persecution later and how engaged he was with that. I think what Michael really reacted to about this does kind of tie into that sort of culture war detente, to pursue the class war kind of point, which is that,
well, even Amartya Sen that he draws upon tremendously. He's technically an economist. Let's
no, for
and
sure.
yet he's talking about cosmopolitanism and his relationship to Martha Nussbaum as well. It's very
sure.
it's a rich body of work that, but you're right though. How does that fit in with what what Marxism is or socialism is?
Yeah, well,
which is the bent that you guys are bringing to that conversation, right? Because without the material conditions, although that Material Sen doesn't address that, he does. But you guys are pushing it way more along Marxist lens to go out and talk about, let's talk socialism here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I think what he really responded to as much as anything about Lula is just like his ability as a political communicator, that he could have, just kind of the way, if you watch some of those clips, when Lula talk about like sort of, making sure that everybody, has, can afford coffee and has like free times they can play soccer with their kids and, and all of that stuff. Like he did have this very like grounded and really, and really effective sort of way of kind of, cutting through the bullshit and sort of, and like direct and like, very directly communicating, what really, what really mattered, which I think is really, which is something that he really wanted to emulate, right? I mean, that they have that like he had, like, Michael was very concerned with, like he would talk about wanting to make sure, that like wanting to think of kind of lefty stuff he was into is, what he would say, like pre-mainstream, right? That they have that like you'd have, that it's that, you want to have, you want to have everything at least have the potential, right? To have this very direct kind of mainstream impact, so I don't know. I mean, like I have, like something, maybe kind of close on this, like something that made me really happy. That's, as we're recording this is on Monday. So last Thursday, I was, I was out at the bar in Atlanta with my friend Ryan Lake, and we and we're out at a place, kind of at the end of the night, St. Patrick's Day. We're out at this place basically across the street from here, and there's this dude who's, like a circular bar, like goes around, and on the other side facing us, there's this dude's like kind of scrutinizing us. Is like, were you on Joe Rogan a couple weeks ago? And we ended up having this extended conversation with him. Eventually, after a few minutes of sort of shouty conversation across the bar, he comes over and he buys us a drink and we talk. And he's this guy who works in construction, describes himself as a born and raised redneck, also describes himself as a fiscal conservative at one point, although I think, as with many people, what that term means to him, I don't think it's very predictive of what he's actually going to think about anything, but he liked the appearance, and we ended up talking for like 20-25 minutes. He over the course of that time, he, I mean, there are definitely some disagreements, and and especially about like how taxes should work and stuff, but he has but he he signs off by the end of the conversation on Medicare for all, on universal pre-K, on redirecting a lot of money from from the military to fund things like that. He at one point of the conversation says that he's very uncomfortable with abortion, but when pressed about what's to do about it, right, says if he wouldn't actually want to ban it, and then agrees at some point of the conversation that that actually what should be done is to give more financial support to young mothers so it could be a meaningful choice. Whatever. I mean, it's a very small thing. It's one dude at the bar, but I guess all I can kind of think about with that conversation is that, this is kind of what Michael was getting at, with a lot of that stuff, right? That you're sort of, engaging with people where they're at, you're not, you're like, you're not trying to, you're kind of not trying to set litmus tests in advance. You're trying to, you're trying to find ways to, to connect with people, where they, where they are, and to think about how you can, kind of, pitch the things that you most care about in ways that are going to mean something to them. And, I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, Michael's heart was just, I mean, you can tell. I mean, the other thing too, I mean, hearing him, the conversation with Josh Summers and Robert Wright and his mother, I mean, and hearing some of their background. I mean, that was a bit of another thing too, that, like my brother died of leukemia in 1983. There was a huge impact on my family growing up.
Oh, God,
and, no, thank you. I mean, it was a, formative thing, where it shattered our family, right? I mean, going through the medical system, in the 80s, moving into the 90s, I mean, the neoliberal, and I live in Canada, right? I mean, it's not like we were living in the States here.
Right.
We were facing, complete bankruptcy. I mean, it was just the emotional toil, of having a child have leukemia and, as a young family going through that. So, I mean, it's crazy. So, and I could tell that, Michael grew, the way he was talking and the way he was relating to people, that, that he was coming from a very difficult sort of position, and hearing some of the, the struggles that he had to, to go out and try and make it and find some sort of vocation and career path for himself, and start to move into, find his own voice in all of this, and to lose him at that point where, he was just starting to hit his stride is a very, dumbfounding. It's dumbfounding, for me to even try and wrap my head around. But I was very moved by Josh, and I mean, obviously, I'm very moved by everybody around Michael and the impact and the personal touch that he had to go and touch people's hearts, and just be where they were, like with them in a certain way. It was very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I mean, one of the things I say at the beginning of the introduction to Matt's book is that if I mean, Matt's a good writer, and I'm sure the book's going to find a significant audience that appreciates it and all of that. But I have there's not the slightest doubt in my mind that if Michael had lived to 2030 or even 2025, the potential audience for a book that was kind of riffing off of his ideas like that one would be like 10 times bigger, because it was just really started to emerge into his own, and like right when really right when the pandemic hit, that was like it was just kind of starting to lift off. And so I don't, I can't I can't imagine. And it's also just, I mean, I cannot, begin to comprehend what it would be like to, to go through, a family member when you were so young and all of that, but I mean, like but it's also just, just, I don't know, I guess it's I mean, I guess it's such a, cliche thing to say, and I mean, it loses some of its power, but I mean, it's just so alive, that they have that I have, it just could not have been more shocking, like anybody else, to just, one day with no particular warning, just not, just not be here, I mean, like that seems, I mean, I think I would have.
No, I mean, it's devastating. No, I mean, just on the friendship side of things, because I mean, clearly he maintained a network of friendships of, that were mutually enhancing and growth. I mean, to see just everybody around Michael, like in terms of what was going on, and, and how inspiring it is, and the work that you guys are still doing in terms of carrying this on as well. I mean, I'm very moved by, all the work that you guys are doing. I mean, you can tell that you guys are doing it from, a place of memory and and carrying, Michael in your hearts, very much so. I mean, I'm, power to all of you guys. And I without a doubt, I know he's looking down and smiling, and I mean, he's very proud. I mean, in terms of everything going on as well. As much as I'm sure maybe he would love to go out and be here, kick our asses around and be like, But no, it's and Ben, I mean, I just thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this stuff with me as well. I mean,
of course.
I mean,
thank you so much for having me.
I mean, yeah, to be continued, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, brother.
All right. See you, man.
Peace.